All right, man. Another episode. We made it to 6, Dan.
Heck yeah. It's been fun as always.
Yeah, we haven't got canceled yet.
That's true. That's true. We must be like fairly politically correct then.
Yeah. Or nobody's listening. One of the two.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, man, today was a good episode. We talked all about, we really got into bows and into arrows and into specifics there, and some good stuff in the beginning on some hunting.
Yeah, you always got to talk about bow hunting, latest journey to Hawaii, hunting those axis deer during the rut. So fun. They're up there with elk and red deer and mule deer is my favorite things to hunt. So yeah, we touched on that latest adventure there. And then, yeah, I love the techie stuff with bows. I mean, I love talking about that stuff, and there's so much good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, well, it's nice that you get two opinions, two knowledgeable opinions that have different preferences into archery and know that there's different ways to do it and different ways that work. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I always pick up a few good tips, talking to you. So it was a good one.
Yep, absolutely. That's the coolest part about doing this podcast, honestly, is what we can bounce off each other, and I'm learning stuff all the time too. That's what it's about. If you're a bow hunter and you're not learning stuff all the time, you're getting complacent and you're declining. You're not going to be able to perform at the best of your ability, and you're getting worse, plain and simple.
Oh man, student of the game, right? Continually learning, continuing to get better. That's where it's all at. Yeah. Well, we just got to thank our sponsors real quick. We'll get into the show. So I wanted to thank Black Ovis. So Black Ovis is an internet retail shop. They carry all the top name brands as well as their own name brand. They have all the best gear, knowledgeable staff. So yeah, it's just a great place to get gear. They carry like Cryptek and Eberly stock, and then like I say, sleeping bags, food, like anything you need there. Dan, have you ever used those guys?
Yeah, and I was going to say, too, they're game bags. I really like them. They're awesome. They're super lightweight. They're absurdly durable for, like, how thin they are and how well they breathe. And so, yeah, that's just a small part of them, too. But, yeah, great stuff.
Oh, you're so right. Those red ones, right?
Yep.
Yeah, those are good ones. Yep, for sure. So make sure to go check them out, guys. Blackovis.com. And, yeah, with that, Dan, man, let's get into this podcast. It's a good one, all about archery and bow hunting and setups. Let's get it started.
Heck yeah, let's do it. For a week, nah. So we're like, we're just going to bring the whole crew this time.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, right on. Yeah, it looks like you had some good action, got into a good buck. Man, it looked like you were into him. I love seeing your video on your story, sneaking into those things.
Yeah, Eva, she did a great job kind of capturing the last bit there. It was one of those situations to die for as a bow hunter, just the location on Maui with how the trade winds blow. You just have the wind just blasting right in your face, and those deer come up out of the gulch with the wind at their back. And, I mean, I could have killed a buck every day if I wanted to out there. This is just, it's set up for bow hunting, plain and simple.
Yeah, that you get those good trade breezes or those good steady breezes like that. Man, that's the key to killing stuff. And then it looked like you had some really good ungulation. There was like a lot of deer there in the frame, but it looked like you were able to keep low enough and move right into range. And then none of them picked you out as you were setting up for the shot.
Yeah, they come out into that little field from the back corner, and it's lower in the middle of that field. There's kind of a hump in there, and so you start just straight across from them with the wind blasting in your face. And then you have that ungulation where you kind of just tiptoe towards the field, and you're just looking over. You can see their backs, and then that grass is probably like 18 inches tall, and so you just cruise right into them. They can't see you. I mean, and it's just like anything, they pick up movement. Whether it's antelope, deer, elk, whatever, they're picking up movement. So you can crawl. You're just crawling, hands and knees, on your stabilizer with your bow, and you're just locked in on them. And if they pick their heads up, you just freeze, stay low and freeze. And as soon as they bury their head in the grass again, then, you're cruising, going as fast as you can, basically on hands and knees, just getting closer. So it's just, it's so dialed. It's awesome. It's one of those spots, just like if you're hunting in the Western US, if you find a spot like this, you want to go back year after year because of just how everything is set up and how the animals are in there and how they're moving. Everything is just so insanely to your advantage.
Yeah. Was Eva able to get one down there?
Yeah, she missed one, and with her, getting into 40 yards, that's kind of her comfort zone. A little harder. I don't like getting that close. Once you get under 40, they can pick you off pretty easy. But she ended up getting a buck. In a different part of the island. She got her first deer with her bow, so that was exciting. She's had a long road hunting those axis. She's never killed anything like a deer or elk or anything. She's killed sheep and pigs and goats and that sort of thing. But as you know, those axis, they're hard to get close to, and then to put a good arrow in them is difficult. And she's had her fair shares of misses and struggle. So it was cool to see that finally come together and see that jubilation after she harvested her first one, and that look on her face. And ultimately, what drew me to bow hunting in the beginning too is tasting that sweet success after many, many failures.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, she earned it. She didn't get an easy road, which, not many of us do. Those axis deer are so switched on, like mule deer, like elk. It's so extremely difficult that there's a lot of guys that hunt for 10 years and don't kill one with their bow, or even a lifetime. Like, we take it for granted sometimes, Dan, me and you, because we've paid our dues and we've earned our skill set, and so it's a bit of second nature to us. Like, it just comes naturally, and we make the right moves and kind of know what we can get away with. But boy, when you go with a new archer, even an experienced archer, to go try to harvest one of these animals, it is extremely difficult. So, like, kudos to her for getting it done. And then, like, I loved you talking about those deer in that spot, using that ungulation, freezing every time their heads are up, because there was a lot of eyes there. And then being able to get up to your knees, get ready for the shot, get a range. And a lot of times, like, I'm sure you're the exact same, but I don't want to expose myself too high over the grass, or that then I'm going to give myself away trying to get my bow drawn or trying to get a shot. And so I try to just get high enough where I can see the vitals over the crest of the hill and know that my arrow is going to go over the top. And I also like to get my range, like, almost through the grass, or not come too high, because there was a lot of eyeballs there, man. So again, it just like case in point of like building your hunting skill of knowing what you can get away with and can't, and played it perfectly on those axis deer.
Yeah, it's all feel. It's all by feel, and you just have to. It's trial and error. That's how you kind of get the hang of it. And yeah, I mean, you nailed it. And even just to get a range on one of those things without being detected is difficult. And that's why I do like that 40 to 60 yard range, because I feel like you're not too close, but 60 isn't too far out of touch either with modern equipment. And the reason I hunt the rut too is a lot of these bucks are posturing and they're walking around staring at each other and pawing the ground, and they have all these distractions. And so that's just one other huge factor that's in your favor when these bucks, have something else to do, like, the rut, and kind of, it's pre-rut, so they're sizing each other up and just, those distractions. So if their head is up, they're probably posturing and looking at another buck. And so, you can freeze and get away with things, but, half the herd was does too. And usually those are the ones that pick you off, are the does. And so, just like elk or deer, you're hunting the does, you're hunting the cows. If you're hunting a buck or bull that is with a herd, you're hunting the does and cows, and, the buck is just there, doing his thing. And for the most part during the rut, relatively unaware.
Yeah, it is nice when they're distracted like that a bit, but you're also right in that you have to beat all the eyes, and sometimes that can get so frustrating. Like hunting elk, you're hunting the entire herd, and it's usually not the bull that picks you out. It's one of the cows, or he's on the far side of the cows, or you get in close and there's a cow at 30 yards closer than you want her, and same thing with late season bucks. Like, I love hunting them in the rut, but I almost think I have better hunting in the pre-rut when the bucks are running solo, and they're more like they have more of a routine coming out into a meadow, holding to that meadow, to when the rut starts, it's absolute chaos. And I'm always getting busted by one of the does in the group, it seems.
Yeah, it's totally unpredictable, like you said, and way more difficult. And yeah, there's something to it for sure, hunting that early season. It has its challenges for early season mule deer, but it's when you just got a bachelor group and they're just focused on feeding. That's a huge advantage to the hunter.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I got to tell you, like, this insight on this hunt I had. So I've been hunting black bears pretty hard here in Montana, and I probably got 10 days in or so, maybe 12 days, and it's just been solid rain here the last week where I haven't even had a chance to get out. And but I did get out with my buddy Dan Heverin, and so we bear hunt together quite a bit. And so we went out, and he was with me a couple years ago. I arrowed a giant chocolate that I had spotted, and he came with me on the stalk, and so he was in my hip pocket when I shot that. So he was up to bat, and we were in this drainage, and we actually saw 3 bears that night. We also saw a sow and 2 cub grizzly, and so we saw this bear, and he came out on the edge of the meadow. And he kind of disappeared in the trees, but it was late in the evening. And so, me and Dan discussed it, and it's like, man, I think that thing's going to be right there feeding in the edge of the trees in the first 100 yards, because there was no feed in that timber as it dove off in the hill, over the hill. It was just all downfall stuff in there. And I kind of knew that. And so I said, man, we just got to send it. We got to go for it, and give ourselves a chance. And so we got over there, and it took us about 50 minutes to get over there. And we're just cresting up on the edge of the meadow, and that wind is blowing every which way. It's like no steady wind. It's swirling so much. And so, like, I held us up there, and I'm like, hey, we just got to hold here. We got to wait for that sun to go down over the hill, get the downhill thermals, and then we'll approach. And we're maybe like 500 yards from that bear. So, like, the toughest thing to do with the winds is to just sit there. After you've been hustling the whole time to get over there to give yourself a chance, just sit there for 15 minutes and let that wind just swirl around. And pretty soon that sun goes back overside the mountain. So, like, I wanted to share that piece with you because it was like such a, when you make those quality moves like that, or have those situations where you hold up, let the wind get right, and then approach in, it just felt like such next level bow hunting. And so we let the winds get right, shaded up over the hillside. The winds got steady and started coming down, and so we made our approach. Got up there on the hill and looking for him, and Dan paused right on the top of the aspens, and we were looking for him where he should be. Didn't see him, and he took about 4 more steps, and I saw that thing over to our right, and he was just over the hillside, and I was able to grab his back of his pack and then both kneel down and then get a range on him. And just like you were saying with those axis deer, man, 40 to 60 is where it's at. And we were in the wide open. I think Dan could have crawled a little bit closer, but I think he was like 54 or something like that, just perfect. And he fed for like 5 minutes kind of facing us, and Dan couldn't really see him behind the sagebrush, so I was ranging, and then, I saw the bear was sideways and had his head turned down, and then told Dan it's now. And he came up, at full draw, had a range, and then put a perfect arrow in that bear, and then went over the hillside and died. This like a really good boar, and like a good payback to a buddy that was there with me that helped me get mine like a couple years ago. But I love that play with the winds, man. It's like a play that you can make on mule deer, on elk, or anything, but just that 15 minutes of letting that wind get right was the difference maker of killing that bear, for sure.
Yep. That's usually what it boils down to, is the wind and playing the thermals. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure you're like me. Probably 90% of harvests come, with morning thermals or evening thermals. Sometimes I killed during, the middle of the day, and get that a good updraft or that that wind, the prevailing wind. But most of my stuff is morning and evenings.
Yeah, 100%. So in those mornings, you're playing the downhill thermal before the sun gets up in the first hour. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. That's when it's the most predictable. You can count on the wind falling. And then in the evening, too, after that sun goes down, you can count on the wind falling. And then, if you're hunting a westerly or a southern slope, then you can probably count on a prevailing wind in the afternoon, like mule deer hunting. But, it revolves all around what the wind's doing.
Man, if you can dial in that wind, you just give yourself such a better chance to kill that animal, and whether, like you say, I love the mornings and the evenings. That's when I kill a lot of my animals too. And then the midday thermals can be really consistent, like you mentioned as well, like on a bedded mule deer or something like that, where you get a consistent wind. But it's just so nice. Like, I love that evening wind. I know once that hillside gets shaded and it's coming down, I can just count on that wind. And it's just like one less thing that I have to worry about while trying to kill those things. Yeah. Well, super cool, man. Yeah, I'm going to make it out. I'd love to do a trip to Hawaii. It's such good training grounds out there. So I did pick up a flight and going to go hang out with my buddies out there and hunt a little bit of axis and some sheep. So it will be a good warm up for season. But it's like difficult out there. It's just like these friendships that we've made. I mean, without my buddies out there and their knowledge base, it'd be tough to have a place to hunt out there. Those guys are, so gracious, like to share their locations and spots and have me out there and host me. So, man, I'm super stoked. I'm going to go out and do a bit of hunting out there as well.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things I get asked all the time, where I hunt or, what the hunting opportunity is like on Maui. And it's like, man, I don't know of any public deer hunting on Maui that's good. But, over the years of just being over there and spending time and getting to know people, and I got access to a private ranch, so that's why I hunt over there, is on private. And yeah, I mean, it's some of these islands, no hunting is possible without private access, and that's just kind of the reality of it in this day and age. And don't get me wrong, there's still public hunting on some of the other islands, but yeah, some of the best hunting that I've found and pretty much what I do nowadays is private. So
Yep. No, it's just the way it is over there. Yeah, it's tough. They've got a lot of public land, but it's not all open to hunting, which is the strange thing. They don't really see it as a resource over there that they managed Hawaii as a state. But it's caught on and gotten so popular. Guys want to go out there and try to hunt. It's too bad they don't see it a bit different, but that's similar to Australia or New Zealand or any of these places. They just don't see it as a renewable resource, or they don't see it as like us hunters would love to go there and spend our money to go hunt their public lands, but they just don't offer a lot of it.
Yeah, it's really, and it's changing. It changes all the time. But the state doesn't really value the wildlife, and it's not native. I mean, I get it. It's not native. But everybody's after the deer. There's a guy over there that shoots them at night, and like the ranch that I have permission on, 4 years ago, they estimated 4,500 deer, and now they're down to 1,000 because of the night operations that they do over there, just culling. And there's a lot of deer on the island. Don't get me wrong. I guess the point I'm making is that it just is changing. All the big ranches are high fencing their places and shooting deer.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Culling
them.
Yeah,
straight up culling them. And so things change, and like, lucky for us bow hunters, there's still some of these areas and parts of private property that are more close to residential areas, so they're not culling them in these areas, and so the deer are still running around, and they don't allow rifle hunting, but guess what, they allow bow hunting. So to every door closed, there's a new door that opens if you look hard enough and honestly living your life right and treating people the way you want to be treated, and guess what? New opportunities arise, and people offer you new opportunities, and so there's always a bright side to it. But it's kind of hard to see some of the areas that I've hunted in the past that are they're eradicating, like up in Kahiki Nui on the backside of the mountain. I mean, there's no hunting up there anymore, and they're going for full-blown eradication on the wild cows and goats and deer and stuff and pigs and yeah, it's just changing. It's amazing country, and the value for feral animals is just not there, unfortunately, with the state.
Yeah, I know. My buddies, really good guys, and you've hunted with one or two of them over there, but yeah, the really good guys, salt of the earth, and even those guys that live there and are residents have a tough time finding hunting properties and lose hunting properties, and so they're trying to put together something now where they have a piece to hunt where all of them can hunt. But yeah, it's just a real struggle there. I mean, like anywhere, really. It's like hunting spots are few and far to come by, or at least good hunting spots, are tough to come by. And whether that's, public and you're putting all this time and research and effort in to find these good spots, or it's private and working really hard to get permission and to get on the right side of these landowners and to get permission to hunt it. So yeah, I know it's a real challenge for those guys too that live there year round. So I definitely feel pretty fortunate just to have a place to be. Yep. Well, how quiet was that Matthews over there?
Dude, I'm telling you, I don't even know, because it's hard for me to tell like a huge audible difference between the V3X and the Phase 4. Yeah, it's quiet. They're both really quiet bows, but I shot 3 deer when I was there, and none of the deer like heard the bow or like even reacted to the string or reacted to arrow flight. Like it kind of shocked me. And it's not like every axis deer jumps the string. It's very situational if they're alert, etc. But yeah, like I shot my buck out of a group of 50 deer, and the rest of the deer, I mean, they reacted to my buck freaking out because I shot him through the heart and he was tearing out of there like a bat out of hell, going 90 miles an hour. And they all looked at him like, he was insane. And so my buck's running off, and like the whole herd is standing there looking the other direction, all at 60 yards from me. I could have shot another buck. And that I shot 2 other does on that week, and yeah, they didn't even jump the string. So I don't know if it's like it's a level of noise that is reduced that like an ungulate can't hear, but I'm convinced that like the days of jumping the string are over.
I am too, man. I have never shot as quiet of a bow. And not only that feedback, but my buddies that would be behind me and I'd shoot didn't even know I shot. I'd come back and, we'd get talking. And I go, yeah, I arrowed him. And they're like, I didn't even hear you shoot. That bow just doesn't make any noise. It is so quiet. It's the quietest bow I've ever shot. And I think it's going to be a real advantage, like you say, in animals hearing the bow and jumping the string. Like I had a really good mule deer towards the end of the season last year. Hadn't had a mule deer jump my string, but the last one, jumped and got out of the way of my arrow. He actually spun or whatever right as I shot. But I think you're right. I think those days, like, not that you couldn't have an antelope or an axis or a mule deer jump your string if it's really quiet and still, but I do think like we're going to see less and less of those, and it's going to give us a real advantage hunting the West or hunting all over just with that limited amount of noise. And not only that, but for like a follow-up shot, or like when I shot my sandbar, all the other sandbar just stood around and had no idea I'd even shot. And not that we can shoot multiple animals, but sometimes that first shot doesn't hit his mark, and I don't think those animals are going to spook very far, which will give you an advantage as well, or all of us an advantage as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge advantage to have. And when you're not spooking game or you're not alerting them, I mean, the sky's the limit. I could see shooting at an animal 2-3 times if you had to. I mean, like with an elk. I mean, you don't stop shooting until he's on the ground with his legs in the air, right? And even if I smoke a bull, I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna shoot him again if I have a shot. And if you zing one through and he's standing there unalert because he has no idea what happened, yeah, that's huge. It's a game changer.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I keep shooting too. If I can get a second arrow in them and they're catching a second arrow, I just know that bad things can happen and arrows can take weird angles. It's like, man, if I can put another arrow, it's more blood, it's more damage. It's just a security shot. So I'm going to do the same thing. I haven't shot a lot of the, I don't shoot a lot of the new bows, and I really love these Matthews, and I have for the last handful of years and love shooting them. And this one's so quiet. The performance and forgiveness is just unreal. I'm just shooting crazy good groups with it and already have built just a ton of confidence with it. So it's going to do really good for me this season. But, I don't really check out the other bows just because it isn't an option for me. I know I'm not going to be hunting with them. And then, I have so much faith and so much love for these Matthews. So I haven't really shot any of the new ones. My buddy Dylan is shooting a Hoyt, one of the, I forget what the new ones are called, but he's shooting that. He's shooting 80-pound limbs. He really likes it. He's a heck of a shot. And I shot with him one night, and he's really accurate with that thing and likes it. Definitely isn't as quiet as that Matthews. We both admitted that. But that seems to be shooting pretty well for him. What about you, Dan? Have you shot any of the new bows out there?
Yeah, that's one of the fun parts of my job is I get to test a lot of bows, all the bow companies every year. This year has been a little bit slim. We've gotten a couple bows in, but yeah, all the big companies. I didn't get a Hoyt this year, but the primes, and I've shot Expedition, PSE. What else is there? I'm looking up on my bow rack right now. All the Bear bows. It's crazy how every bow company produces a quality bow. It's 2023, and technology is good. The last 5 years, all the bow companies are kind of trending towards that wide limb pocket, stiff riser, wide limbs, big cams, parallel limbs. That, in my opinion, Matthews kind of set the trend with the Halon when they started that in 2016. But it's funny because the evolution of modern bows, that's what it's kind of gone to. Is these wide limb pockets, big wheeled bows, split limbs, and stiff risers, like hulked out risers that, a light bow now is, it's always been under 4.2 pounds, but like these Matthews, 4.4 pounds, that's not, necessarily considered a light bow, but just like with everything in archery, it's all trade-offs, right? What do you want to give up to gain? And so with, a really rigid, hulked out riser is going to give you stiffness, way less knock travel. Your riser's not going to flex at full draw. It's going to tune better. It's going to shoot better. It's going to be more consistent. Hence the bridged risers that we see. The stiffer the riser, the better. So that's probably the biggest thing. I could go all day about some of this stuff because I shoot them all the time. But yeah, in my opinion, the Matthews, I know for a fact Matthews bows are the most efficient. I speed test all these bows. I shoot them all side by side, same arrow through the chronographs. And with Matthews modular system on my specs and with any other bow, Matthews always shoots the fastest arrow.
Wow.
And it's just a fact. I'm just saying that's what I've found. And, the downside of their modular system is if you want to change the draw length or you want to change your draw weight, then you have to change your mod. So you have to go down to your bow shop and get a different mod. Whereas like some of these other bow companies that have a rotating module where you can change your let off, you can change your draw length by just loosening a few screws and then sliding that module. It's so convenient, and you don't have to go down to your bow shop, but they're not as efficient. So you're not getting maximum performance. And Hoyt does a good job of it too. They have a few different mod settings. Like if you're in between like a 26 and a 28 draw length, then you get this mod. If you're in between a 28 and a 30-inch draw length, you get this mod, and then you do have some sliding in between those. And those are handy because you can still adjust your draw length and still have, efficiency. But Matthews are the most efficient. That's what I've seen.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah, it definitely, I think you can shoot any bow well nowadays. They're all building great bows. And two, I think some of it comes down to personal preference and how it fits your grip and how the bow fits and feels to you. So I definitely think that's part of it. And like you say, with the mod, it just makes the cams and the bow efficient for every different draw length. So it's not just the guys that have a 28-inch draw length are going to get the most efficiency out of the bow. It's everybody. It's if you have a 26.5 and you have the right mod in, you're going to get the same efficiency as a 30-inch draw length with their right mod. And so, yeah, it is a pretty good system. It does make it a pain to change things out a bit. And, draw length makes such a difference on these bows, like really messing with your setup to find the right draw length. And I know, Dan Hevern, who I mentioned earlier, that arrowed that bear, he's using one of my Matthews because he really likes the 26.5-inch draw length, and his is at 27. So it's a half inch. He could change his mods around or whatever, but he likes that 26.5, gives him way more control over his bow. And I actually made that switch when I first started shooting archery. I shot a 27.5-inch draw length, and I actually shot like a Z formation where my hips go a little forward to the target and lean back, and I just didn't know any better, and nobody ever told me because nobody walks up to you in an archery line and goes, hey, you're doing that wrong, and so I kind of had to figure it out for myself, and then started messing around with draw length, and I'm like, man, that 27 feels way better. And then it was even a handful of years ago, or 6-8 years ago, tried even a little bit shorter yet, a little bit longer yet, and found that 26.5, I found that I have T-Rex arms and I have to shoot dang near a woman's draw length to shoot it accurately, but it just it shoots really well for me and I can command it. So messing around with stuff like that, and you can adjust it a little bit with your string loop length, but you don't want that string loop so short to where you're putting torque on the string, then that arrow won't be coming off true. And so you do have to have it long enough where you can twist your hand, and I'm talking about a handheld release where you can twist a little bit and it's not going to put torque on that string. But you can adjust it a little bit that way. And then the other way would be to put some twist in your string, and you can shorten it up a little bit, or even to put some to put some twists in your cables. That'll also you can lengthen it that way a little bit. So yeah, definitely some things you can do, but really you're only talking about an eighth or a quarter inch, where if you want to move it by a half, you have to adjust those mods.
Yep, no, exactly. And that's, I guess you kind of brought it up. The overall takeaway is you just got to shoot as many of the bows that you can get your hands on and decide for yourself. And archers they're funny. We're a funny breed. We're very fickle. We're very picky. Once we get started on a brand of one item, whether it's a broadhead or a bow or an arrow, and we've had a little bit of success with it, it's like pulling teeth to change your mind to switch to another brand. And most of the guys that switch to another brand, they probably had a bad experience, or something happened. Maybe their string broke, or they missed an animal, or who knows. Just archers in general, I feel like are a weird group. And I'm one of them for
too,
sure.
I'm part of the weird group. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it does. You want to build trust in all these things you use, and if it lets you down in crunch time, and whether that's a miss or you have a mechanical failure, or I think a good time to run through these bows is during all your practice sessions. And if you have a problem during your practice sessions of your rest not falling away or something going wrong, all of a sudden that starts to weigh in on my decision of whether or not I want to use that. And so and the adverse is true as well, is when you have success and everything operates right and you use it in all different temperatures and all different variables, and it always performs and shoots like it should, you build confidence in it. And if it's not broke, you don't want to fix it. It's like I have no need to try something new when what I have works. And not that I don't want to try something new and try to find something that'll work better, but I just build confidence in my system, and I have no need to change.
Yep, exactly. And that's what it's about ultimately, is confidence, but it has to be real confidence. It can't be off of perception. It can't be off of, what you read on the internet. You got to experience it for yourself and build that confidence at the range. And it's just crazy how one little thing, like a miss in bow hunting, it can screw your head up if you allow it to. But that's probably one of the hardest things to master, is to keep your head level when crunch time is at its max,
Absolutely.
And yeah, and archery, there's many steps along the way that archery will test you. And I know I've been there too, where when I was learning how to tune bows and I ended up chasing my tail. This was when I was a teenager back in the day, and man, it really screwed with my head. But I didn't understand the fundamentals at the beginning because, I'm learning for myself. The internet was just a thing, so I'm, just learning as I go. But it's so cool with the resources that are out there nowadays, and this podcast, of course, and EBJ, the magazine, and we do a ton of stuff on these sources of information to help guys just jumpstart and be proficient at archery a lot quicker than probably you or I ever were when we started.
Oh man, I have lost my mind shooting archery and bow hunting. I mean, there's times when I've just absolutely lost it. I remember having a Bowtech, which Bowtech makes great bows, but I had one that just didn't get along with me, where I'd sit in there and shoot at paper and just couldn't get that thing to shoot for me, and I just didn't know enough. I didn't know enough to cam lean, to move the tune over. I was trying to adjust my grip to make the bow tune instead of trying to adjust the bow to tune to me. There's just tricks you learn along the way, and then I take it into shops, and there's some great shops around, but they just didn't. It seemed like they didn't have the answer for me, or weren't real interested in trying to help me out, or maybe I couldn't explain it or articulate it well enough, the problems I was having. But yeah, I just lost my mind at times. But once you get a handle on it and you get these bows to shoot right, you build your confidence, like there's really nothing you can overcome. Like, not that me and you have seen everything, but we've seen a lot in our days, and we've been through a lot of challenges with bows and a lot of challenges with archery. And so like anymore, I'm just unfazed by it. It's just like, whatever it is with a bow, I'll figure it out. I'll get it shooting for me. I'll get to the bottom of it. And it's kind of the beauty of the information day and age that we're in, is there is so much information out there that you can figure it out. And, I've ran into guys that have been losing their mind on bows, where you can just give them, hey, just change the shims on it and move the tune over, or do some cam lean, or adjust this a little bit, or hey, did you check your timing? And all of a sudden they're fixed in their bow shooting and they're back to having confidence. So it is just diving into it and trying to get the best setup you can. So I know we've talked about setup before, Dan, like episode 2, we talked a little bit about it. We talked about our sights quite a bit. Use the 5-pin mover from Black Gold, and we talked about the points of like having that moving sight is so nice to be able to put the pin right where you want the arrow to hit, but it's also nice to have the multi-pin, because I do have 20 to 60 quick if things happen quick, and then also, if an animal jumps back or something like that, say I'm dialed to 40 yards and that animal jumps back to 50 yards, I have a 10-yard reference just from the gap between my pins that I can estimate. So it's like I get the best of both worlds, where I can get really precise shooting of dialing my shot, holding the pin where I want it to go, executing, but then I can also get a quick shot. If that animal comes into 30 or 35, I can just look at my pin gap and I've got 20 to 60 and shoot. I'd say the downfalls or the upsides to like shooting a single pin or a center pin slider is everything center, center, center. So center your peep, center of your housing, pins in the center of that. And I think that makes for real accurate shooting. And you've done that quite a bit, right? Where you shoot a single pin?
Yeah. Single pin slider. I like some of these new sights that are coming out with, a 3-pin vertical, 2-pin vertical, the dual track from Black Gold, and then this dialed archery. You have the 3-pin option. But yeah, just the cleanliness of the sight window and the precision. Like you said, we've gone over this a little bit in the past, but just how it gave me the ability to be a little bit more accurate when I had that bad astigmatism before I got LASIK surgery. And it's been corrected a fair amount by LASIK, but I still have it. And once again, it's like one of those things. Once I started shooting that way, and I've found some success with it, and I like the open sight picture, it's hard for me to change back. I don't really want to change back.
Well, and it's like there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's like more than one way to be successful at archery, and so much of this comes down to personal preference. And I don't care if the bow brand you're using, if you're using a light arrow, a heavy arrow, if you're using expandable, a fixed blade, like you can be good and be successful with any of those means. It's just building confidence and finding the system that fits you and your style. And we're all different as well. We have different energy. And I know me and you, when we get talking about arrows or when we get talking about broadheads, we can have different views on them because I have that 26.5-inch draw length, and I just don't get the energy that you get with a 29, right, Dan? 28.5? Yeah. So, like, I just don't get the same energy that you do. So my needs are just a touch different than your needs. And I think it's good to compare and contrast. And I think it's also good to just find what fits you and your system and then to build confidence in that system. And animals just die. And so I think arrow weight were fairly similar. I like a 450 right in there, and I've gone as light as 400. Kind of my money zone is like 425 to 475, and so the weight is really important for penetration. You really want to get like momentum energy. Kinetic energy is like more of a rifle equation, but that works too. It's just this momentum energy, and the heavier arrow is, the more energy it's going to have, the more it's going to penetrate, no matter what. That's what science tells you, And so why would guys go lighter? Well, I go lighter because you get range forgiveness. It's like after you get out there in that range of 40 to 60 yards, if I'm shooting a super heavy arrow and I'm off by a yard or two, I can miss the vitals. And so I like to have this range forgiveness. And over the years, I've just learned that, man, it's where you put the arrow. I'm not trying to shoot through a shoulder blade. Like, I don't get through many shoulder blades. I'm looking to aim 4 inches off the shoulder, middle of the lungs. I'm looking to put that arrow through the lungs, heart, or liver, and that animal dies every time, And so I'm all about accuracy and forgiveness, and like shooting around a 450 grain arrow for me gives me that range forgiveness where I can be off by 2 or 3 yards and still hit the vitals. So if that animal takes a step, or sometimes I range an animal and I'm ranging the butt and he's quartered away, and those vitals have to be, they're at least a yard further. And then if that animal takes a step after I'm drawn or something. And so for me, I'm looking for the perfect mix of penetration, performance, and then also range forgiveness is kind of what I'm looking for in an arrow.
Yeah, definitely. All such important factors to factor in. And it's funny because it sounds simple, like an arrow is an arrow, right? You have a nock, you have some vanes, you have carbon, and then you have an insert. But there's so many things that kind of play a factor on how your arrow tunes, how it flies, and then if your insert's going to fail or not. And my mentality is your hunting arrow is only as good as your insert is. And I've had inserts fail. And I mean, you have 3 different types of arrows: the standard size arrows, which are, the old fat logs nowadays. But what are they? A third of an inch, 0.0305 or so, or 0.305 standard size, all the way down to like a 204 diameter and everything in between. But the inserts are huge. And I've lost animals because I've busted an insert on like they call them a small diameter. They're not a micro diameter, and they're not a standard, but they're a small, but just a bad insert design. But definitely something to factor in too when selecting an arrow is how tough is the insert. And that's why I like those micro diameter arrows so much, is because usually they're an oversert and they're pretty bulked up. And they have, a portion of that insert that goes inside the shaft sometimes, and then other times it's just an oversert that protects that end of the carbon, and those rarely fail. And then, like, contrary of, the standard size arrows, you just have like a 10 to 15 grain little insert that slides inside the carbon, and then you don't have anything protecting the carbon. And I've had those, blast open, in the past. And so, and then I've had the small diameter size, the 204 or the 244s or 260s. I can't remember what they are, but it's kind of like a insert outsert. and there's really no integrity protecting the end of the carbon, and I've had those break at the end of the carbon on elk, and that's led to, a wounded animal and, a failed hunt. So yeah, that's, arrows are so important. I don't get caught up on crazy FOC. Actually, I don't like a lot of weight up front, because just the more weight you have up front, the harder it is to get a good broadhead tune out of it. And so I like, a 100 grain head and a quality aluminum insert, like the 34 grain insert from Method there. I feel like that's plenty, and I have 12.8 FOC. And so, I don't get crazy with all the weight up front, and I'm with you too. I don't really like a heavy arrow. I don't like a light arrow. I consider a heavy arrow like above 490 grains total weight, and a light arrow is like under 420 grains. I like that 430 to 450 for many of the same reasons that you brought up. But be very careful. I guess that's my words of wisdom. If you're hunting for a new arrow for this fall, is really pay attention to that insert, oversert, outsert, whatever it is.
Dude, what a great point. You're so right. The components, right? That's what makes up the arrow. And that insert, like, I realize that I pick rock solid inserts and just find an arrow that I like, and that's what I use. And, I do some testing around, but yeah, you're so right that, to have that insert and then like a ballistic collar that covers the connection between the insert and the carbon is so important. And you can just shoot those into a cement wall and screw in a new tip and they're good to go. They hardly ever fail. But you're right, in my younger years, I remember, everything that you said. The insert outsert will break right at the edge of the arrow to the edge of the outsert, and you can lose your broadhead and bust that arrow. Or what about like the total insert ones that then when you shoot them, the carbon explodes like a bomb in the front of it, and the broadhead just sticks into the front of the arrow. So like all these fails that, you're right, you hit a bone, you hit a rib going in, a shoulder, like if your arrow doesn't have the strength to get through it and transfer that energy, it's no good. So man, that's such great tips. And then nock, I just like a consistent knocking point, and really it's more about my string loop that I tie in. I tie serving high and low, and I give it a little bit of space, because I don't want my string loop to pinch that arrow nock when I'm at full draw, because if it pinches it, then it's going to control how that arrow leaves the bow. So I want that really loose. So for me, a good nock, but I want it strong enough, because if one of those wings fail, you could be one of the horror stories of shooting carbon into your arm. So I definitely want like a good consistent nock that isn't going to widen up over time or isn't going to move, good stiff arms, and then consistent knocking point. And then I shoot a 4-fletch. Like I think it's good to, with fletchings, they're made to guide your arrows. And furthermore, they're made to guide your broadheads. Like, guiding field points isn't that tough. You could shoot super small fletchings with field points and shoot really accurately. But the moment you put on broadheads, it's not going to be as forgiving of an arrow. So I think the key here is to get enough steering on your arrow, but not too much where you're getting so much wind drag where you're really slowing that arrow down and making more noise in the air. And so, yeah, that like you say, we're using Vector, and they don't sponsor the podcast or anything. Like they're building a really good arrow right now. They come with a 4-fletch. I think a 4-fletch, it doesn't get any more wind drag, but you get a bit more steering out of it. So I see no reason why not to shoot a 4-fletch, but I have done testing with 3-fletch and 4-fletch, and I don't think I could shoot good enough to tell the difference. It's like I like them in theory because it's going to give my broadhead more steering, and I'm not getting any more wind drift out of it. So in theory, it makes sense. But yeah, honestly, I don't know if I shoot good enough to even tell the difference between them. But kind of fletchings, like I think I'm looking for fairly low profile, but like a good 2-inch fletch or a 3-inch fletch, somewhere in there to really help steer broadheads.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your favorite fletching is. I mean, I've shot some in the past, 2-inch ones that they kind of have a profile on them, and they're a little bit noisier in flight. Probably the most common vanes out there, the Blazers. But what have you found for the quietest fletch out there? Because I think that's important, and especially in this day and age too, where bows are so quiet, I think animals hear your arrow. Actually, I know they have in the past, and I've shot fixed heads and these fletchings in the past, full helical, and these things are just hissing through the air, super loud. So, I mean, how do you tackle that? What have you done?
Exactly, right? I shoot, well, I really like a Fletch Silent Night 200. They've got a good coating, and they have a really good cut on them in the front and the back to stop wind noise. I don't really like ridges in my fletchings. I think those create noise on the fletchings, so I'm not a huge fan of that. I like them to be smooth, and I like a good cut on the front and back. I do like a helical fletch on them, but I'm not going to get crazy with it. I just want to get that arrow spinning and stabilizing. So, with a 2-inch fletch, I get about as much as it'll allow me on a 4 fletch to get them all in there and to be cutting. But yeah, that's been my go-to fletch for a lot of years, and I've done some sound testing as I've sat down range, like behind a wall, and been able to listen to different arrows and different fletchings come down. And man, it definitely makes a difference. And what you hear, and so like this is still up for debate, but what I hear when I sit down range is I hear the thud of the bow go off, and then there's like a time delay, and then I hear it boom, and the arrow hits. So I hear the fletchings like right before it hits the target. So boom, bow, boom, and it hits the target. So you hear those fletchings last, but you're right is that it's still noise and could be what these animals are jumping. And why not have a quiet fletching, or as quiet as you can make it? So that's kind of what I've had success with. But, these arrows are shooting real good for me, and I haven't had anything jump the string, and they seem to be fairly low profile and pretty quiet in the air.
Yeah, that's what matters, and that's why I kind of led you into that, because the Silent Night vein, I mean, it's legit in how they're built and how quiet they are. They're legit, and it's not like I'm sponsored by them. We're not sponsored by them. We shoot anything. I'm not actually shooting them this year just because of method. They don't offer them, which is fine. But there's other quiet veins out there, but just something to be aware of when you're selecting a vein. It's huge. It definitely matters. And then that's the one thing is the steering and drag, and that kind of is a downside of a fixed blade broadhead. And I've always been a big 4-blade fixed head guy. I mean, I shot Slick Tricks for years, the original ones, but Slick Tricks, a big 4-blade broadhead paired with a noisy vane makes for a pretty noisy arrow. Mm-hmm. And I think like these hybrids that we shoot now, they're a lower profile and they're quieter, plain and simple. I mean, if you don't have all these ribbed blades, hissing down range, it takes a lot of noise out of it. So I think that's important. And then, man, it's the same thing, and it's a give and take, because you want your arrow spinning, but you don't want it to overspin and more wind drag, and you lose velocity, and your arrow drops off faster at distance too. I actually did an article several years ago for EBJ with that lab radar, and I tested different vanes at distance. And this lab radar, it measures velocity from the bow down to the target, like at 60 yards. So I'd shoot like a straight vaned arrow and shoot it at 60 yards, measure the velocity, from 0 to 60, and then shoot a full helical arrow. And I had, velocity drop off because it's just more drag. I think it was like 6 feet per second or so by time it got to the target. So is that measurable? Is that a deal breaker? I don't know. You decide. But finding that happy medium with maybe like a 2 degree or, whatever, just enough to stabilize your arrow and not have so much drag is something to definitely consider.
Yeah, man, that's interesting, Dan. Did you notice any accuracy? And accuracy tests are so tough. Like, you shoot 10 arrows and you mark every one from center, and then shoot 10 arrows and you're just not shooting as good. But I'm just curious if you did any accuracy testing with them.
Yeah, shooting broadheads and shooting fixed heads. And that's ultimately why I go with a helical fletch, is because especially at distance, I'm shooting usually 295 feet per second or faster if I'm shooting a fixed head or like I shoot a hybrid. So there is a blade there. Your arrows start to wander a little bit if you're shooting, a straight vein, of course, or maybe a 1 degree, especially in some wind. And my groups, they do tighten up at distance with a full helical. So I think after like 50 yards, 50, 60 yards, I started to see a difference in accuracy, but 0 to 50, I mean, I'm accurate just as much, but I think, the more hang time and the more, outside disturbances that are affecting your arrow, if you don't have that helical, play a larger and larger role as you move down range, out to 70, 80, 90 yards.
Interesting, man. Yeah. And I think the most important things with these arrows and arrow flight is to really mate up the arrow with your bow. It's like to have a correctly tuned and spined arrow in there. Like, and correctly spined is like operating with the bow. And, it's like, I know you can go a little bit stiff and get them to operate, but I like, you can get a lot of arrows to tune out of your bow. But again, to me, it's like the forgiveness factor. It's like, how many arrows can you shoot that shoot a perfect bullet hole through paper? It's like that is a real forgiving arrow tune, like when you can get it in there and it really functions with that bow, so every arrow's coming out of there straight. Now you can put like too weak of an arrow in there, and sure, you may get it to shoot a bullet hole, but then it's ripping left and it's ripping right. Like, I think getting a really good tune that's that matches the bow is important. And so there's like, you can use the arrow tune charts. They just get a little bit dicey when you're putting weight on the arrow. If you're, you shoot a 100, I do like a 125 on my arrows. I feel like the extra weight pulls them towards the target a little bit more, for my setup anyways. But you can go off their arrow spine charts. You just got to make sure you have the correct weight and then also the correct pull of your bow. Like a lot of these 70-pound bows are pulling 73 pounds. And so, like, I think you just want to check it and be as accurate as you can. Or I use like a program called Archer's Advantage. And Archer's Advantage, you can put all the specs of your bow and see how that arrow is operating and see whether it has a weak spine or a stiff spine or where it's optimal at. And that's like the same service, and why I think Vector doing so well is they plug it into a computer program to find the best dynamic spine that matches your bow. And I think that like extra step that they're taking to build the arrows that match the bow are really going to help with accuracy.
Yeah, it's huge. And that's the disclaimer right there too, is that never try to go bow hunting or screw on a mechanical broadhead onto your arrow and just say, well, I'm shooting mechanicals, I don't have to tune my arrow, I don't have to tune my bow. That is completely false. It's not a shortcut to accuracy or broadhead flight. Always broadhead tune your setup. Always, always, always. I always start out with like a Magnus Stinger or something that has a big bladed profile and start with there and broadhead tune and work your way down. And it'll make your life so much easier with accuracy and consistency at distance if you just take your time and broadhead tune. And a lot of that stuff you'll encounter along the way. Too stiff, too weak. You got to mess with it. Some bows out there have really, really handy tuning technology on them. For instance, like these elite bows, they have this set tuning technology where you actually can like move your limb pocket on your bow, so you can get any bow to tune to any arrow, or any arrow to tune to your bow. It's super awesome because it's so easy. Like on a Matthews, you don't have as much power. Like if you can't get an arrow to tune, but you have all these arrows, then you got to do your top hats. So you have to take your cams off and shim your cams for them to shoot that specific arrow. Whereas for me, it's just easier if an arrow doesn't tune out of a Matthews, I just get a stiffer arrow or a weaker arrow if that's what I'm having issues with. But like the top hat tuning system is great in its own way. And so that's the other thing to factor into when you're buying a bow, is how tunable are they, and how many arrow choices do you have? I mean, do you live out in the woods away from town where it's harder to get arrows, or do you live in town, you have a good bow shop where you can try different arrows at the bow shop before you buy a bow? I mean, that's ideal before you purchase a bow, but it's kind of like ammunition for a rifle. I mean, not every round is going to shoot accurate out of your rifle. You have to tune it. You may have to, and especially if you're a hand loader, obviously, you're going to have to tweak it. And archery's the same way. Not every arrow is going to shoot perfectly out of your bow, and that's why we're all, in the end, we're just all mad scientists, just trying to to get accuracy out of our setups.
Oh man, yeah, that's the system, man. It's the broadheads show you what's going on, so you got to shoot those bigger ones and see where they group with the field points. And then, then I work my way down, and I love hunting with an expandable. They're really forgiving. They're an accurate head, but for the tuning process, you're right, as you want to shoot those big fixed blades and make sure they're tuning with your field points. And yeah, I start by paper tuning, and that's important, Jimmy, but eventually broadhead tuning's where I end up and making those arrows hit the middle, man. So yeah, it's like, archery, she's a fickle mistress, like you just have to like find these processes and work your way through them. And at times they're challenges or you're questioning what's going on. But, once you figure out this process, then it seems like every bow just steps into line where it should, or you understand the workings of it or can adjust things to make it shoot, man.
Yeah. And every bow, tunes a little bit differently. And like Matthews, what we shoot, I mean, they're so easy to tune, especially once you know the spine that they like. Super easy to tune. They stay in tune. If you do need to make any adjustments, you got to top hat them, so you got to shim your cams. There's other bow companies that out there that make it easier. I brought up the one earlier, is the set technology from Elite. It's pretty cool technology where you can move your limb pocket and make any arrow shoot out of your bow. So that's pretty cool to have at your disposal. Now, like for me, if my Matthews, say, is not liking one spine of arrow, I can just, go down to the shop or tuck back into my arrow stack and try a different arrow. But a lot of guys, especially if you live out of town, you have, say you bought 16 or 24 arrows last year, and this is what you have to shoot out of your bow, then sometimes you're going to have to tune your bow, and you might have to take your bow down to the bow shop. But ideally, you buy a bow, you try different arrows at a bow shop and find what your bow likes the best. And then you just have, the least amount of messing with it in the end, if you start off with something that your bow likes.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, it's nice when you start off with an arrow that your bow likes, not one that it doesn't like. God, you're just fighting yourself at that point. If you don't get your spine right or shooting too weak, then you're really fighting it to try to make the bow shoot because the arrows just aren't getting along with it. So yeah, man, so important. Well, dude, I've used up a bunch of your time, and speaking of shooting, I better get outside and shoot my arrows for the day.
Heck yeah. Yep. It's about that time for sure.
Yeah, well, congrats on that trip to Hawaii, man. It sounded amazing. And, thanks for getting on the podcast tonight. And, we'll keep releasing them. We got 6 in. I feel really good about the podcast. Like, I think we're putting out really good content to guys, and I love that it's bow specific. So, I've had a bunch of fun.
Absolutely. It's been a great time, and the feedback from guys, and I'm sure you've heard too that I've got a couple messages of basically doing Q&As. Guys want to hear about specific topics, and I think that's probably on the horizon, if I had to guess, but we'll definitely address specific questions that listeners have.
Oh, right on. Good idea. Yeah, write them down and we'll put them in a podcast. So, yeah,
yep.
Thanks as always, guys. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Like, gosh, without your guys' support, we can't make this thing work. And also share it and review it. Gosh, the reviews really help with the algorithm. So thanks for listening in. That's another week. Talk to you next week, Dan.
Heck yeah, sounds good. Thanks, buddy.